Hello students, welcome to the lecture on demand and supply. And after this lecture, we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain the concept of demand and supply, discuss on market demand and determinants of demand, differentiate shifts versus movements along the demand curve, describe factors affecting price elasticity of demand, explain the market supply and determinants of supply, understand supply schedule and supply curve, explain price elasticity of supply. Let us start today's lecture with understanding the concept of demand.
Today I'm going to talk about supply and demand. It's a very important part of economics, so listen carefully. So, first you need to know what supply is. Supply is the amount offered for sale at each given price level, and on a graph, the supply curve would have positive correlation. As the supply increases, the price increases, because there is more opportunity to make profit. A change in price moves us along the curve. So factors affecting supply are, for example, limited resources, technology improvement, money, price of resources, productivity, wages. Now, a wage increase in the factory will shift the supply curve to the left, because production costs will rise, driving down profit margins, and making firms less efficient. On the other hand, if raw materials become cheaper, the demand curve shifts to the right, because there are more material to make goods, so efficiency can be increased. Now, let's move on to demand. Demand is the amount the consumers are willing and able to pay at each price. Demand has negative correlation because as the demand increases, the number of people willing and able to pay for the goods decreases. The main factors affecting the demand curve are brand quality, trends, weather conditions, competitors, advertising and publicity, legality, and of course, the price. For example, if a type of fashion was trending, the demand for that will increase. And if the demand increases, then the price increases. On the other hand, demand will decrease if the competition is better in quality than the other. And if the demand decreases, then the price decreases.
Demand is called effective desire and is defined as the willingness and ability to buy a commodity at a particular price within a given time period in the market. The law of demand. The law of demand states that people will buy more of a product at a lower price than at a higher price if nothing changes. States that at a lower price, more people can afford to buy more goods and more of an item more frequently than they can at a higher price. Let us describe the figure. At price P1, the quantity of that good demanded is Q1. If the price of this good were to be decreased to P2, the quantity of that good demanded would increase to Q2. The same is true for P3 and Q3. When prices move up or down, assuming all else is constant, the quantity demanded will move up or down the demand curve and define the new quantity demanded. I hope you understood the concept of demand. Now we will study about supply. Supply is an amount of commodity a seller is willing to sell in a market at a given price in a given period of time. The law of supply states that at higher prices, producers are willing to offer more products for sale than at lower prices. States that the supply increases as prices increase and decreases as prices decrease. States that those already in business will try to increase productions as a way of increasing profits. With the help of demand and supply, we can attain equilibrium. At market equilibrium, The market forces of demand and supply are balanced or equal to each other. Equilibrium price is the price of a commodity at which its quantity demanded is equals quantity supplied in the market. Similarly, equilibrium quantity demanded and supplied at the equilibrium price. Market demand. After understanding demand, it will be easy for you to understand the concept of market demand. The aggregate of the demands of all potential customers for a specific product over a specific period in a specific market. Individual demand is the demand of one individual consumer in the market for a good or service. Market demand is the total combined demand of all consumers in the market for a good or service. The market demand curve for good X is found by summing together the quantities that both consumers demand at each price. For example, at a price of $1, consumer 1 demands 2 units while consumer 2 demands 1 unit. So the market demand is 2 plus 1 is equal to 3 units of good X. In more general settings, where there are more than 2 consumers in the market for some good, the same principle continues to apply. The market demand curve would be the horizontal summation of all the market participants' individual demand curves. Market demand primarily focuses on the one-to-one relation between the demand price and the quantity demanded. The quantity demanded at higher prices is less than the quantity demanded at lower prices. After discussing these topics, one must think about how to derive a market demand curve. Market demand is the combined demand of every buyer in the market. It is derived by adding the quantity demanded of each buyer at different prices. The total market demand for crab puffs in Shady Valley is the combined demand for these 3 buyers. If, for example, the market price is 10 cents, the market demand is 170 crab puffs. This is the sum of 100 from Roland, 50 from Durwood and 20 from Lisa. Each quantity in the far right column of the table is derived in a similar fashion. If the market price is 70 cents, then the market demand is 60 crab puffs, the sum of 40 from Roland, 20 from Durwood and 0 from Lisa. Initially, we discussed about the individual demand and later we moved towards the market demand. Now we will try to understand the difference between individual demand and market demand. Individual demand. The individual demand is the demand of one individual or firm. It represents the quantity of a good that a single consumer would buy at a specific price point at a specific point in time. Market demand. Market demand provides the total quantity demanded by all consumers. In other words, it represents the aggregate of all individual demands. Determinants of demand. I hope you understood the concepts. Now we will move further and study about demand equation or function. The relationship between the 5 factors and demand is usually expressed as a formula or function. The following formula tells us that the quantity demanded is a function of these 5 determinants. Here's how each element affects demand. Price. The law of demand states that when prices rise, the quantity demanded falls. This also means that when prices drop, demand will rise. When demand rises, businesses will usually raise the price to avoid being out of stock and disappointing customers. Conversely, when demand falls, businesses will usually drop the price even if only temporarily for a sale to sell more of the good or service. Income. When income rises, so will the quantity demanded. When income falls, so will demand. Prices of related goods or services. The price of complementary goods or services raises the overall cost of using the good we demand, so we will want less. For example, when petrol prices raised, the demand for cars fell. Petrol is a complementary good to cars. The overall cost of driving a car rose along with petrol prices. The opposite reaction occurs when the price of a substitute rises. When that happens, people will want less of the good or service. Taste. This is the desire, emotion, or preference for a good or service. When tastes rise, so does the quantity demanded. Likewise, when tastes fall, it will depress the quantity demanded. Expectations. When people expect that the value of something will rise, then they demand more of it. This explains the housing bubble of 2005. Housing prices rose, but people bought more because they expected the price to continue to go up. Number of buyers in the market. When the number of buyers in the market rises, so will the quantity demanded. The number of buyers actually increased, driving up the demand for goods. Demand schedule. It is a table which contains values for the price of a good and the quantity that would be demanded at that price. If the data from the table is charted, it is known as a demand curve. Here are a few observations about this demand schedule. First, as the price increases from a low of $5 to a high of $50, the quantity demanded of yellow tarantulas decreases from 90 to 0. Lower prices are related to larger quantities. This inverse relation between demand price and quantity demanded is the basic law of demand. Second, the numbers in the schedule represent maximum values. That is, if the price is $5, then the maximum quantity demanded is 90 yellow tarantulas. Third, this whole schedule, all 10 pairs of the price quantity numbers and all others that could be included is demand. Demand is the entire range of prices and quantities, all pairs. In contrast, quantity demanded is any specific number of yellow tarantulas that buyers are willing and able to buy at a specific demand price. Selecting a different price generates a different quantity demanded. Fourth, these numbers are hypothetical, not just in the sense that they were made up to illustrate demand, but in the sense that they suggest a what-if relation. Difference between individual demand schedule and market demand schedule. An individual demand schedule shows different quantities of a commodity bought by an individual consumer at different possible prices, whereas a market demand schedule is the summation of innumerable individual demand schedules for a definite commodity. Each individual consumer has got his own quantity at a particular growing price. Thus, we can arrive at market demand schedule by combining different schedule of individuals in the market. Shifts versus movements along the demand curve. To understand the concept of demand in a better way, we will now study about the shifts and movements on demand curve. A shift in the demand curve is caused by a factor affecting demand other than a change in price. If any of these factors change, then the amount consumers wish to purchase changes, whatever the price. The shift in the demand curve is referred to as an increase or decrease in demand. There are many variables that can shift the demand curve. Here are the most important. Income. With increase in income, demand for goods also increases. Prices of related goods. With the fall in the price of substitute goods, demand for goods fall. With the rise in price of complementary goods, demand for goods fall, and vice versa. Taste. With the favorable change in the taste for the good, the demand for goods increases. A movement along the demand curve occurs when there is a change in price. This may occur because of a change in supply conditions. The factors affecting demand are assumed to be held constant. A change in price leads to a movement along the demand curve, and is referred to as a change in quantity demanded. Difference between shift and movement can be better understood with the help of graphical representation. Movement. A movement along a demand curve occurs when the only factor that changes is price. Because only price changes and price is the y-axis, there is no physical need for any translation of the demand curve. As price increases, the movement would be to the left. As price decreases, the movement would be to the right. If the quantity decreases, it is known as contraction. If the quantity increases, it is known as expansion. Shift. The shift from demand curve D1 to demand curve D2 is represented by an actual translation across the plane. This particular figure features an inward shift to the left or a shrink in demand. An outward shift would be an increase in demand.
Binarka Mr. Vishnu. Just came back from work?
Hi Miss Tan, no I just went marketing, but did not buy anything. Ayo, nowadays everything also so expensive one. So terrible lore.
Yes, Mr. Vishnu. Tell me about it. That day I wanted to buy 10 papayas, but the price was $2 each instead of the usual $1. Alamak. I ended up buying only 4 papayas instead.
Yes Miss Tan. Ayo, that day I wanted to cook chicken rice with one whole chicken, but the price of chicken doubled to $6. In the end, I bought only half. Hiya, must be because the bird flu caused the supply of chicken to fall off.
Anyways, I need to go now. I am now a yoga instructor because the salaries of yoga teachers have gone up by 50% since last month. I took a 1-month course and can now teach. With this higher pay, hopefully I can improve my purchasing power, assuming prices don't rise further.
Wow Miss Tan so cool ah. Okay, I will also go and learn yoga and join you in teaching, okay?
Price elasticity of demand. Another important topic in study of demand is price elasticity of demand. It is the relative response of a change in quantity demanded to a change in price. More specifically, the price elasticity of demand is the percentage change in quantity demanded due to a percentage change in price. The price elasticity of demand is often summarized by this handy formula. The price elasticity of demand is commonly divided into one of 5 elasticity alternatives. Perfectly elastic. Perfectly elastic means an infinitesimally small change in price results in an infinitely large change in quantity demanded. Relatively elastic. The second category is relatively elastic, in which the coefficient of elasticity falls in the range E is greater than 1 and less than infinity. With relatively elastic demand, relatively small changes in price cause relatively large changes in quantity. Quantity is very responsive to price. Unit elastic. The third category is unit elastic, in which the coefficient of elasticity is E is equal to 1. In this case, any change in price is matched by an equal relative change in quantity. The percentage change in quantity is equal to the percentage change in price. Relatively inelastic. The fourth category is relatively inelastic, in which the coefficient of elasticity falls in the range E is greater than 0 and less than 1. With relatively inelastic demand, relatively large changes in price causes relatively small changes in quantity. Perfectly inelastic. The final category presented in this chart is perfectly inelastic, given by E is equal to 0. Perfectly inelastic means that quantity demanded is unaffected by any change in price. The quantity is essentially fixed. It does not matter how much price changes. Quantity does not budge. Factors affecting price elasticity of demand. The number of substitutes products. The more close substitutes available there are in the market, the more elastic is demand because consumers find it easy to switch alternative product. The switching cost between alternative products. There may be costs involved in switching one product to another. In this case, demand tends to be inelastic. The degree of necessity for goods. Necessities of essential items of goods tend to have an inelastic demand, whereas luxury items of goods tend to have a more elastic demand. The time period for changing price. Demand tends to be more price elastic. The longer that consumer has to respond to a price change, they have more time for cheaper substitute products and switching their spending. Habitual consumption. Consumers are normally less sensitive to the change of price of the goods that they habit and will make purchase even its price increases. Relationship between revenue and price elasticity. Price elasticity of demand and total revenue are closely interrelated because they deal with the same two variables P and Q. If our product has elastic demand, we can increase our revenue by decreasing the price of that good. P will decrease, but Q will increase at a greater rate, thus increasing total revenue. If the product is inelastic, then we can actually raise prices, sell slightly less of that item, but make higher revenue. As a result, it is important for management to know whether its product has inelastic or elastic demand. Market supply. After studying about demand, we will move further and study about supply. Demand and supply together help in attainment of equilibrium. Market supply. The combined supply of everyone willing and able to sell a good in a market. It is graphically represented by a positively sloped market supply curve, which can be derived by combining or adding the individual supplies of every seller in the market. Determinants of supply. The 5 ceteris paribus supply determinants are resource prices, production technology, other prices, sellers' expectations, and number of sellers. Resource prices. The prices paid for the use of labor, capital, land, and entrepreneurship affect production cost and the ability to supply a good. Production technology. Technology is what producers know about the ways to combine inputs into the production of outputs. An advance in technology makes it possible to sell more of a good. A decline in technology means producers can sell less of a good. Other prices. The supply for one good is based on the prices paid for other goods that use the same resources for production. A change in the price of a substitute good or substitute in production induces sellers to alter the mix of goods purchased. An increase in the price of a substitute motivates sellers to sell more of this good and less of the substitute good. Sellers' expectations. The decision to sell a good today depends on expectations of future prices. Sellers seek to sell the good at the highest possible price. If sellers expect the price to decline in the future, they are inclined to sell more now. If they expect the price to rise in the future, they are inclined to sell less now. Number of sellers. The number of sellers willing and able to sell a good affects the overall supply. With more sellers, there is more supply. With fewer sellers, there is less supply. A change in any of the 5 determinants can cause either an increase in supply or a decrease in supply. Increase in supply. An increase in supply is a rightward shift of the supply curve. An increase in supply means that for any price, for every price, sellers are willing and able to sell more of the good. Decrease in supply. A decrease in supply is a leftward shift of the supply curve. A decrease in supply means that for any price, for every price, sellers are willing and able to sell less of the good. A change in supply. This change in the overall supply relation, a change in all price quantity pairs. It is caused by a change in one of the 5 supply determinants and is indicated by a shift of the supply curve. A change in quantity supplied. This is a change in the specific amount of the good that sellers are willing and able to purchase. It is caused by a change in the supply price and is indicated by a movement along the supply curve from one point to another. Study of a supply schedule will help us to understand the concept of supply in a better way. A table which contains values for the price of a good and the quantity that would be supplied at that price. If the data from the table is charted, it is known as a supply curve. Here are a few observations about this supply schedule. With the increase in price from $5 to $50, the supply also increased from 0 to 900 units. This shows direct relation between supply and price. Second, the quantities in the schedule represent maximum values. That is, if the price is $10, then the maximum quantity supplied is 100 yellow tarantulas. Third, this whole schedule, all 10 pairs of the price quantity numbers is supply. Supply is the entire range of prices and quantities, all pairs. In contrast, quantity supplied is any specific number of yellow tarantulas sellers are willing and able to sell at a specific supply price. Selecting a different price generates a different quantity supplied. Fourth, these numbers are hypothetical. With the help of the supply schedule, we can plot our supply curve. A graphical representation of the relation between the supply price and quantity supplied, holding all ceteris paribus supply determinants constant. A supply curve graphically illustrates the law of supply, the direct relation between supply price and quantity supplied for a particular good. It is one half of the standard market model. A demand curve is the other half. Like price elasticity of demand that we understood earlier, similarly we have price elasticity of supply. Price elasticity of supply. The relative response of a change in quantity supplied to a change in price. More specifically, the price elasticity of supply is the percentage change in quantity supplied due to a percentage change in price. A range of elasticity. The price elasticity of supply is commonly divided into one of 5 elasticity alternatives: perfectly elastic, relatively elastic, unit elastic, relatively inelastic, and perfectly inelastic, depending on the relative response of quantity to price. These 5 alternatives form a continuum of possibilities. Perfectly elastic. The top of the chart begins with perfectly elastic, given by E is equal to infinity. Perfectly elastic means an infinitesimally small change in price results in an infinitely large change in quantity supplied. Relatively elastic. The second category is relatively elastic, in which the coefficient of elasticity falls in the range E is greater than 1, less than infinity. With relatively elastic supply, relatively small changes in price cause relatively large changes in quantity. Unit elastic. The third category is unit elastic, in which the coefficient of elasticity is E is equal to 1. In this case, any change in price is matched by an equal relative change in quantity. The percentage change in quantity is equal to the percentage change in price. For example, a 10% change in price induces an equal 10% change in quantity supplied. Unit elastic is essentially a dividing line or boundary between the elastic and inelastic ranges. Relatively inelastic. The fourth category is relatively inelastic, in which the coefficient of elasticity falls in the range E is greater than 0, less than 1. With relatively inelastic supply, relatively large changes in price causes relatively small changes in quantity. Perfectly inelastic. The final category presented in this chart is perfectly inelastic, given by E is equal to 0. Perfectly inelastic means that quantity supplied is unaffected by any change in price. Two factors that affect the numerical value of the price elasticity of supply are availability of substitutes. The ease with which sellers can find substitutes in production affects the price elasticity of supply. The general rule is that goods with a greater availability of substitutes are more sensitive to price changes. With more substitutes available, sellers can easily respond to price changes. Time period of analysis. The longer the time period of analysis, the more responsive quantities are to price changes. Brief periods do not allow sellers the time needed to adjust their production decisions to price changes. Various methods of measuring elasticity. Now we will learn about the various ways in which elasticity can be calculated. Percentage method. According to this method, price elasticity is estimated by dividing the percentage change in amount demanded by the percentage change in price of the commodity. Thus, given the percentage change of both amount demanded and price, we can derive elasticity of demand. If the percentage charge in amount demanded is greater than the percentage change in price, the coefficient thus derived will be greater than 1. Total expenditure method. Total expenditure method was formulated by Alfred Marshall. The elasticity of demand can be measured on the basis of change in total expenditure in response to a change in price. It is worth noting that unlike percentage method, a precise mathematical coefficient cannot be determined to know the elasticity of demand. Graphic method. Graphic method is otherwise known as point method or geometric method. This method was popularized by Method. According to this method, elasticity of demand is measured on different points on a straight line demand curve. The price elasticity of demand at a point on a straight line is equal to the lower segment of the demand curve divided by upper segment of the demand curve. Thus, at midpoint on a straight line demand curve, elasticity will be equal to unity. At higher points on the same demand curve, but to the left of the midpoint, elasticity will be greater than unity. At lower points on the demand curve, but to the right of the midpoint, elasticity will be less than unity. Summary. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. Demand is the willingness of people to buy goods. Law of demand states that as price fall, demand rises. Price, availability of substitutes, income of consumer, taste and preference are determinants of demand. Market demand is the cumulative individual demand. Supply is the amount of goods sellers are willing to supply. Law of supply states that as the price of goods rise, supply also increases. Price of other goods, technology, sellers' expectations are some of the determinants of supply. Elasticity of demand and supply can be measured by using three approaches: percentage approach, point approach, and expenditure approach.